Hello and welcome to The Value of Others, Part 8. This is my YouTube channel where I read books and smoke cigars and drink coffee. And we are currently reading a book written by Orion Taraban. And this is just a miniature cigar. And I have with me a black coffee. At approximately 7 p.m. A double-edged sword. If neither party had other options, then negotiation would be an empty ritual at best, and a total sham at worst. The existence of other options doesn't just create the necessity for a negotiation, it also creates the necessity for a negotiation bounded by reality. This is because people don't trade in inherent values. They trade in estimated values informed by comparable transactions. If the going rate in your town for a coffee is £3, a cafe couldn't charge £20 for a cup of joe and expect to do business. The fact that the cafe has competitors offering a similar product is good for customers, who won't get hosed by price gouging. On the other hand, if the going rate in your town for a coffee is £3, a cafe could charge 10 cents for the same drink and steal customers away from other businesses. The fact that the cafe has competitors offering a similar product is bad for business owners, who constantly contend with the possibility of being undersold. And while most people won't lose any sleep about a cafe going under because most people typically identify with being consumers, the reality is that people in any economy are always both producers and consumers. In the sexual marketplace, every buyer is also a seller, and every seller is also a buyer. Consequently, competition is always a double-edged sword. It is both a threat and an opportunity. And this is why so many games in sexual relationships revolve around attempts to control competition. From a purely self-interested perspective, an ideal situation would be one in which I fully retain all my optionality, i.e. your competition, while I completely eliminate all my competition, i.e. your optionality. All other things being equal, this would provide me with the most advantageous position from which to negotiate terms for myself. The commercial equivalent to this would be something like the marketplace in a company town, which, because it lacked competition, wasn't a true marketplace. In many communities built... Get off me, dog. Um, where was I? Can you stop kicking me, dude? The commercial equivalent to this would be something like the marketplace in a company town, which, because it lacked competition, wasn't a true marketplace. In many communities built around a particular industry, workers weren't historically paid with cash, which was universally accepted and created optionality, but with scrip, which was only accepted at the company-owned stores and eliminated optionality. The workers could only buy from the company, but the company was free to sell to consumers besides the workers, and since the company enjoyed a monopoly on the workers' business, the workers predictably paid more for the same good at the company store than they would have needed to on the open market. It goes without saying that this arrangement was only made possible by the significant power imbalance between the company and the workers. In general, the more powerful party can secure more advantageous terms for itself in any transaction, and this privilege is roughly proportional. The greater the power imbalance, the more advantageous the terms. Another takeaway is that exclusivity is expensive. The company's monopoly allowed it to charge more for the same good than it otherwise would have been able to. In most sexual relationships, couples typically regulate competition by forming symmetrical commitments. For instance, I will be your exclusive sex dealer, and you will be my exclusive sex dealer. However, the economics of this arrangement only makes sense if the values of the respective exclusivities are comparable. Remember, equal isn't always fair, and proceeding in this fashion can potentially compromise relationships in the long term. As a counterexample, if one actor has many options and may enjoy even more in the future, and if the other has few options and may enjoy even fewer in the future, then a symmetrical commitment probably wouldn't be in the former's best interests. The second actor's lack of options already creates a de facto exclusivity. So the first actor would be giving up something, presumably, of great value in return for something that he or she already had. It doesn't make sense. On the other hand, the actor would likely advocate hard for a symmetrical arrangement, as securing one would allow him or her to enjoy a desired good at functionally no additional cost. In any given sexual relationship, it is generally the actor with less optionality who pushes for exclusivity. Another conclusion from the same principle would be that the smaller the perceived optionality disparity between the two actors, the more likely they will enter into a symmetrical arrangement, and the greater the disparity, the more likely an asymmetrical arrangement will emerge. On the docks, before passage has been secured, the general rule is that captains are interacting with multiple passengers, and passengers are examining multiple captains. This is as it should be. An informed consumer is a powerful consumer. Since people trade in estimated values, informed by comparable transactions, it makes sense that both parties would conduct some measure of due diligence prior to entering into a transaction in earnest. After all, it's impossible to know whether you're paying more than you need to, or securing the most desirable option at a given price point if you don't do a little research first. This is one reason why aggressively targeting actors as soon as they first enter the sexual marketplace will indefinitely remain a negotiation tactic for both men and women. Freshly minted captains and newly arrived passengers are much less likely to have the knowledge and experience necessary to understand whether a given offer is actually compelling in the context of the larger marketplace. As a result, more savvy and experienced actors can sometimes secure transactions with very desirable options at a fraction of the usual cost. Conversely, it can also prove nearly impossible to transact with new captains and passengers, as their self-evaluations have not yet been tempted by the constraining forces of the marketplace. Given that sellers almost always value the good they are selling more highly than buyers do, and the reality that new actors in the sexual marketplace do not yet have a TSMV from which to anchor a negotiation, some of these self-valuations can be absurdly high. So this tactic enjoys a variable degree of success. Even though due diligence is a reasonable strategy for both marketplace roles, passengers will generally spend more time in the research and evaluation phase than captains. Indeed, testing the captain is one of the three prerogatives of the passengers. This occurs as a result of another inherent asymmetry between the two roles. Namely, a ship can have multiple passengers, but a passenger can only be aboard one ship at a time. Let's consider some implications of this fact. Since captains generally want to sell as many tickets as possible, while passengers typically only want to buy a single passage, captains and passengers evaluate each other differently. Consider what happens in commercial air travel. when you're looking to buy a ticket to a specific destination, you will likely research various carriers across various dates to determine with whom to book your passage. All other things being equal, you will choose the cheapest, most convenient, and most comfortable option. Carriers don't do this. They don't research all the travelers looking to book a ticket and offer passage only to the most compliant, highest paying ones. In fact, it might look as if carriers conduct no research whatsoever into their travelers and that they're functionally willing to fly anyone who pays. But that isn't strictly true. Carriers don't conduct research. They just do it at the airport. It's called security screening. To get on the airplane, you must consent to your person being searched and your baggage being examined, otherwise, best of luck boarding that flight. Unlike travelers, carriers don't conduct research to secure their best options. They do it to avoid their worst ones. The same holds true in the sexual marketplace. Since passengers can only be aboard one ship at a time, they will generally conduct more due diligence using the available competition with the ultimate goal of securing their best overall option. After all, a given ship can have a profoundly influential effect on the experience of a single passenger, who must, in any case, forego all other ships to secure his or her passage on this one. In contrast, since a ship can have multiple passengers, captains will generally only conduct enough diligence to ensure that they are not taking on a catastrophic option. This is because a single passenger does not have a profoundly influential effect on any given ship, unless, of course, he or she is a terrorist or the only one aboard. In fact, the more passengers on board, the less the non-catastrophic influence of any one passenger matters, since this influence will be averaged across the entire manifest. The upshot of this is twofold. First, it means that passengers typically mate and date with the intention of maximizing benefit in a minimized domain, that is, with the goal of securing their single best option. And second, it means that captains typically mate and date with the intention of minimizing loss in a maximized domain, that is, with the goal of securing as many non-terrible options as possible. We see these same economic incentives reflected in the reproductive behavior of men and women, which informs mating and dating to a considerable degree. With respect to initiating a sexual relationship, men notoriously have much lower standards than women do, and fewer barriers to entry. This is partly because, in any given month, men produce billions of sperm, capable of impregnating many, many women. From an evolutionary perspective, they are incentivized to secure as many non-terrible options as possible, as this will increase the likelihood that at least some of their offspring will survive to sexual maturity. From the perspective of most men, it is enough that a woman simply do not undesire it is enough for a woman simply not be undesirable to entertain a sexual relationship. On the other hand, women typically have much higher standards than men do in any given month, and higher barriers to entry. This is partly because, in any given month, women produce a single fertilizable egg, capable of being impregnated by a single man. If this occurs, it comes with the risks and liabilities of pregnancy and childbirth, as well as an opportunity cost that prevents them from reproducing with anyone else for the better part of a year. From an evolutionary perspective, they are incentivized to secure their single best option, as this will increase the likelihood that their offspring will survive to sexual maturity. From the perspective of most women, a man must be desirable, often very desirable, to attain a sexual relationship. These realities create yet another synergistic effect between marketplace role and biological sex in the case of male captains and female passengers. Their role incentives align with their reproductive capabilities. Female captains are hampered by the difficulty, if not the sheer impossibility, of taking on multiple passengers. Consequently, they are more or less forced to operate under a different business model than male captains in order to remain solvent. If male captains can operate as commercial airliners, which defray the risk and expense of their operations by negotiating affordable passage with a multitude of low-paying travelers, then female captains generally operate as private jets, with which defray their risk and expense by negotiating a costly passage with a single high-paying traveler. The issue is that most men who could afford such a ticket are captains themselves and won't lightly surrender their posts. Most male passengers would not be able to afford such a service. There is much more I could write about the consequences of marketplace role asymmetry, but I will content myself with just one more observation, namely, it predicts differences in how men and women pursue sexual opportunities outside of their committed relationships. In other words, it predicts how people cheat. Basically, since a ship can have multiple passengers, captains are much more likely to cheat simultaneously. This is cheating in the most commonly understood sense. Someone is having an affair behind his or her partner's back. While an obvious ethical breach, this strategy aligns with captains' overarching incentive to pack their cabins with as many passengers as possible, paying customers as possible. And the bitter truth is that a pre-existing commitment may not be enough to satisfy this objective, and since male captains trade passage for sexual opportunity, we could expect this form of cheating to be more prevalent among this demographic. On the other hand, since a passenger can only be aboard one ship at a time, passengers are much more likely to cheat consecutively. This is cheating in a less commonly understood sense. Someone immediately leaves one relationship in order to enter into another. The ethical breach in this case is less obvious, as there may, technically, be no overlap between the two relationships. But it exists, nonetheless. To understand why this is a breach, consider, for example, the ethics code of psychologists. Unsurprisingly, the code establishes that it is unethical for physiologists to enter into sexual relationships with their patients, i.e., to enter into a simultaneous relationship. However, this statute would be functionally useless if psychologists could get around this restriction by simply ending the therapeutic relationship, i.e., to enter into a consecutive relationship. This is why they must, among other things, wait 2 years from the point of termination to initiate a sexual relationship with a former patient. Side note from my own mind. Why aren't you allowed to date clients? Is that actually like a law, or does that depend on the business you work for? That is baffling. Personally, I do know a man who I believe has had children with his client. It wasn't a clinical practice, so I guess, it's quite a different world. He is a coach of his own accord, with his own business. But still, weird world, huh? So many rules. Consecutive relationships must also be unethical to close the obvious loophole on simultaneous relationships. And while this is an ethical breach, jumping ship is a strategy that aligns with passengers' overarching incentive to travel to their chosen destination as comfortably as possible with their best available option. The bitter truth is that a pre-existing commitment may not be enough to satisfy this objective, and since female passengers trade sexual opportunity for passage, we would expect this form of cheating to be most prevalent among this demographic. Of course, this doesn't mean that male captains can't or don't cheat consecutively, or that female passengers can't or don't cheat simultaneously. It just means that we should expect these forms of cheating to be less common in the indicated demographics than the ones previously described. If you've noticed, my hands are a little bit soily, dirty, it's because I've been working in the fields. I will wash my hands and have a shower once I've finished with work today, but I'm not finished with work today. Hence why I'm having coffee at 7 p.m. Someone's having fun on a motorbike, dirt bike. Eh? Strategies for optimization. Given what we've discussed so far, we are well positioned to extrapolate an overarching strategy on how to approach negotiation in the sexual marketplace at a high level. Consider the following: men trade resources for sexual opportunity, and women trade sexual opportunities for resources. Captains try to secure as many non terrible options as possible, and passengers try to secure their single best option. All transactions must be secured within a larger context of open competition, and no actor will pay more for a given option when it can be bought for less. Regardless of its desirability, if all these statements are true, then what strategies would best position each actor in the negotiation process as a function of role sex interaction? Male captains would be strongly incentivized to prioritize resource acquisition. If invested onto their ships, these resources would not only increase the likelihood that more passengers will consider these captains to be their single best option, but they would also facilitate access to more desirable passengers as well. This would allow male captains to access more desirable sexual opportunities from more female passengers, optimizing both their role and their sex incentives. Male captains should also position themselves in sectors of the market where they can be reasonably assured of being considered the single best option for the greatest number of female passengers, even if that means being considered less desirable to more overall passengers. They should also consider marketing features of their ships in order to generate interest and cultivate intersexual competition among the passengers, both of which drive up the price of fares. Finally, since resource acquisition tends to increase as a function of time, male captains are typically at their most disadvantaged position at any given time point. Their default strategy is to wait. On the other hand, female passengers would be strongly incentivized to prioritize their physical attractiveness, as this is the primary metric by which men measure the desirability of any given sexual opportunity. Investing in their appearance would not only increase the likelihood that captains will commit more resources to access their sexual opportunity, but it would also attract attention from more desirable captains as well. This would allow female passengers the best possible chance of securing more resources from their single best option, optimizing both their role and sex incentives. Female passengers should also position themselves in sectors of the market where they can be reasonably assured of being considered attractive relative to the greatest number of direct female competitors, even if that means being considered more desirable by fewer overall captains. They should also consider marketing features of their attractiveness in order to generate interest and cultivate intersexual competition among the captains, both of which drive down the price of fares. Finally, since physical attractiveness tends to decrease as a function of time, female passengers are typically at their most advantaged position at any given time point. Their default strategy is to act. Next, we come to female captains. If optimizing for both incentives, we would expect a female captain to trade sexual opportunity for resources from as many non terrible options as possible. In the modern age, this needn't look like actual prostitution, though the oldest profession is alive and well today. For example, female captains can use technology to leverage their sexual opportunity for resource acquisition across a wide swath of men. Doing so would not technically require the initiation of a sexual relationship. Remember, resources are only directly exchanged for sex in prostitution. In most sexual relationships, resources are exchanged for sexual opportunity only. Female captains need only suggest the possibility of sex to motivate the transaction of resources, and since the value of their sexual opportunity is primarily measured by their physical attractiveness, which tends to decrease as a function of time, female captains would be incentivized to secure as many resources as possible from as many men as possible as quickly as possible. Once the value of their opportunity decreases past a certain threshold, these women would likely attempt to switch roles and secure as many resources as possible from their single best option as a female passenger. In this way, they could maximize the transaction of resources for their sexual opportunity across their lifespans. As for male passengers, if optimizing for both incentives, we would expect them to trade resources for sexual opportunity from their single best option. However, this poses some difficulty, as male passengers typically don't have as many resources with which to transact as male captains do. This means that male passengers not only consistently lose out to their intersexual competition for both classes of women, but that they also rarely have enough interest to make selecting their single best option a meaningful decision. Male passengers overcome this difficulty by offering something that goes against the fundamental incentive of male captains: exclusive commitment. As we've discussed, the value of exclusivity can vary considerably from person to person as a function of their optionality. It's also something that men, as the gatekeepers of commitment, have to give. Since most male passengers are de facto exclusive, i.e., they have little to no optionality, they conjure value out of nothing by offering women an exclusive commitment, which enables them to beat out, at least some of, their intersexual competition. This is facilitated by the fact that many women value exclusivity very highly, not only because it eliminates her own intersexual competition for the same resources, but also because it's the resource that male captains who would find the arrangement too expensive are least likely to offer. Consequently, the optimal strategy for male passengers is to get married to the most desirable woman who will have them. In this way, they offer the provision of resources in an exclusive commitment to their single best option. In this chapter, I discussed some of the most salient features of marketplaces and argued that the necessity to transact with others is a net positive for both individuals and their communities. In particular, I focused on two essential properties of marketplaces: antagonism and competition, that give rise to the necessity of negotiation, and I described some of the ways these properties influence the sexual marketplace on a high level. Finally, I offered optimization strategies for each of the four role sex combinations. All other things being equal, these strategies should help to position actors most advantageously in their respective negotiation processes. All these considerations affect negotiation on a macro scale. In the next chapter, I will discuss the game of negotiation on a micro scale, that is, in the moment-to-moment exchange of an interaction, and the strategies that people predictably employ in their attempts to get what they want. If you'd like to further explore the topics presented in this chapter, please scan the QR code to access a curated playlist on the PsychHacks channel on YouTube. Now what I'm going to do is scan the QR code for you, and I'm going to insert the link in the description below, so you can check out Dr. Orion Taraban's YouTube channel and the playlist which is synced up with this chapter. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Follow this thread as we continue into chapter 5 on my next video. Don't forget to smoke a cigar a day, because a cigar a day keeps the doctor away, and drink coffee, because a coffee a day keeps the tiredness at bay. And also check out my link below to my animal skulls and bones business, where I sell animal skulls like this. Sheep, which I source from the mountains in Wales. Isn't it cool? This guy is called Alfred. And this guy, when he dies, will be sold as a complete skeleton. Only joking. He's too precious for that. But, I think Isaac's got fleas. Thanks for tuning in anyway. Ready for a walk, Isaac? Walkie? Cracking view. Anyway, peace out. See you next time.